that point, you have to be quiet. You have no choice. You have to be quiet. So I hope you understand the rule at this point. Now, here's what I want to ask you.
Seven words that no witness in congressional history has ever heard before. You have to be quiet. You have no choice. Not a suggestion, not a request. A statement of constitutional authority from the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee to the Attorney General of the United States. And the reason Jamie Raskin had to say it tells you everything about what Pam Bondi was trying to do in that hearing room. She wasn't there to answer questions. She was there to run out the clock, to filibuster, to go off on wild goose chases and tangents until the 5 minutes each member had evaporated without a single substantive answer being given. Raskin had warned her before the hearing started. Don't do this. Don't waste our time. Follow the rules. She ignored him. She told him to his face, "You don't tell me anything." And that is when Raskin had to explain something that should be obvious to every witness who sits before Congress. When a member reclaims their time, you stop talking. You don't have a choice. Subscribe right now and hit that bell, because what happened in that exchange wasn't just about one contentious hearing. It was about whether congressional oversight still functions when a witness refuses to accept the basic rules of accountability. House Judiciary Committee, the 11th of February, 2026, 5 hours into testimony. Pam Bondi had clashed with nearly every Democrat on the committee. She'd attacked Jamie Raskin's credentials. She told Joe Neguse he doesn't get to reclaim his time. She'd refused to acknowledge Epstein survivors sitting behind her. She'd called questions about documented failures, theatrics, and getting in the gutter. And she developed a pattern. Every time a Democrat asked a tough question, Bondi would pivot, deflect to Obama, attack Merrick Garland, bring up crime statistics in the questioner's district, talk about the stock market, anything except answer the actual question being asked, and she'd do it at length, taking up precious minutes of the 5-minute window. Each member had to conduct oversight. Representative Jerry Nadler from New York experienced this firsthand. Nadler is the former Judiciary Committee chairman. He'd conducted oversight hearings for decades. He knew how they worked. Members make opening statements, then ask questions. Witnesses provide answers. Simple, standard. How every congressional hearing has functioned for over 2 centuries. Nadler spoke for about 4 minutes, providing context about the Epstein files and the Justice Department's failures to charge any co-conspirators. Then he asked his question, a direct question about how many of Epstein's perpetrators had been indicted under Bondi's watch. Bondi started to answer. But instead of addressing the question, she launched into an attack on the impeachment proceedings against Trump. She brought up Robert Mueller. She demanded apologies from Democrats who had pursued accountability. She accused him of attacking the president. She said she wouldn't have it. Nadler tried to interrupt, tried to reclaim his time, tried to redirect to the question he'd actually asked, but Bondi kept talking. Louder, more aggressive, talking over him, until Nadler did what Bondi was trying to prevent. He answered his own question, zero. Zero co-conspirators charged. That was the answer Bondi was trying to avoid giving, so she filled the time with attacks and deflections until there was no time left for follow-up. That is not testimony, that is obstruction. And Jamie Raskin had seen enough. Raskin interrupted the exchange. His voice was calm but carried authority. I told you about that, Attorney General, before we started. Before the hearing even began, Raskin had pulled Bondi aside, explained the rules, warned her not to filibuster, not to run out the clock, not to waste members' time with non-responsive answers and political attacks. She'd heard the warning, and she'd chosen to ignore it. Bondi's response was immediate and defiant. You don't tell me anything. Think about what that sentence reveals. The Attorney General of the United States, sitting as a witness before a congressional oversight committee, telling the ranking member that he doesn't get to tell her anything. That is not just rude. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of the constitutional power structure. Congress has oversight authority over the executive branch. The Judiciary Committee has oversight authority over the Department of Justice. When a witness appears before that committee, they're there to answer questions, not to lecture members, not to set their own terms, not to decide which questions deserve answers and which can be deflected. The members tell the witness how the hearing works, not the other way around. And Bondi's "you don't tell me anything" revealed that she either didn't understand that or didn't care. The hearing continued. More questions, more deflections, more tangents, more attacks. The pattern intensified. By the time Raskin got his own questioning turn, the problem had become undeniable. Bondi wasn't just being evasive. She was actively refusing to comply with basic hearing procedures. So Raskin did something unusual. Before asking his substantive questions, he took time to explain the rules, out loud on the record. For Bondi and everyone watching, we've never had a witness who has misunderstood our rules and been unable to conform his or her conduct to our rules before. Let that statement land. Never. In the history of House Judiciary Committee oversight hearings, they'd never had a witness who couldn't follow basic procedural rules. Attorneys general from both parties had testified. Some had been evasive, some had been combative, but all of them understood and followed the fundamental structure. 5 minutes per member. Questions get asked. Answers get given. If a witness goes off topic, the member reclaims their time, the witness stops talking. This isn't complicated. It is how oversight works. If you are still watching, hit that like button right now, because what Raskin said next is something every person who cares about governmental accountability needs to hear. We have only 5 minutes, and so we use our time to ask you specific questions. 5 minutes, that is what each member gets. In those 5 minutes, they have to provide context, ask questions, get answers, and conduct follow-up. It is not a lot of time, which is exactly why the rules exist, to make sure that limited time is used for actual oversight rather than witness filibustering. If you do that, then we're allowed to say we are reclaiming our time. Raskin continued. The rules are clear. If a witness goes off on what Raskin called a wild goose chase or another tangent, if they start answering a question that wasn't asked or attacking the questioner instead of addressing the substance, the member can reclaim their time. That is not Raskin's rule. That is congressional procedure, established over centuries, applied to every witness equally, and then came the sentence, the 7 words that made headlines. At that point, you have to be quiet. You have no choice. You have to be quiet. You have to be quiet. Not, I'd appreciate if you would be quiet. Not, it would be helpful if you stopped talking. You have to. It is not optional. It is not negotiable. When a member reclaims their time, the witness stops talking. Period. You have no choice. Those 3 words are critical. Because Bondi had been acting like she did have a choice, like she could decide whether to answer questions, like she could override members' authority to control their own time. Like congressional oversight was something she could participate in on her own terms. Raskin was correcting that misunderstanding. You don't have a choice. Congress has constitutional authority to conduct oversight. When you sit before a congressional committee as a witness, you comply with their procedures. You don't get to rewrite the rules because you don't like the questions. Raskin concluded with a statement that was part explanation, part warning. So I hope you understand the rule of this board. The House Judiciary Committee, which has rules which every witness is expected to follow, which Bondi had been violating for hours. The hope that she would understand wasn't optimistic. It was pointed because Bondi had already demonstrated she either didn't understand or didn't care. And if she continued refusing to follow basic procedures, there would be consequences. Not just political legal. Witnesses who refuse to comply with congressional subpoenas or hearing procedures can be held in contempt, can be referred for prosecution, can face actual legal jeopardy. Raskin wasn't threatening that, but he was making clear that the rules exist for a reason and apply to everyone. Even the Attorney General, Chairman Jim Jordan, the Republican from Ohio, jumped in to defend Bondi. I think the Attorney General is doing just fine. Of course he did, because from Jordan's perspective, Bondi's filibustering was working. Every minute she spent attacking Democrats, deflecting to previous administrations, or bringing up unrelated topics was a minute Democrats couldn't use to expose DOJ failures. Jordan's job as chairman was to protect the witness from his own party. And Bondi was making that easy by turning every question into a partisan battle rather than a substantive exchange. But Jordan's defense actually proved Raskin's point, because doing just fine in Jordan's framework meant successfully avoiding accountability. And that is exactly what oversight hearings are supposed to prevent. The pattern Bondi established wasn't new. She'd learned it from Trump. When confronted with difficult questions, attack the questioner when presented with damaging evidence, claim it is politically motivated. When asked to explain failures, blame predecessors, run out the clock, make so much noise that substance gets buried. It works in press conferences where there is no time limit. It works in friendly media interviews where hosts won't push back, but it doesn't work in congressional hearings. Because in congressional hearings, the members control the time. And when they reclaim it, witnesses have to stop talking. That is the rule Bondi kept violating. That is the rule Raskin had to explain. That is the rule she had no choice but to follow. Think about what was at stake in those exchanges. The House Judiciary Committee was conducting oversight of the Department of Justice's handling of the Epstein files. More than 1,000 victims, 0 co-conspirators charged. Victims' names exposed while perpetrators' names were redacted. A pattern of decisions that protected the powerful and abandoned the vulnerable. These weren't partisan talking points. These were documented failures that demanded explanation. And Bondi's strategy was to prevent those explanations from being given by filibustering, by deflecting, by attacking, by refusing to comply with basic hearing procedures that would force her to address the substance. Raskin's insistence on the rules wasn't about procedure for procedure's sake. It was about making accountability possible. Because without time limits and reclamation authority, witnesses can simply talk until the hearing ends without ever answering a single question. Honestly, the "you have no choice" moment revealed something about Bondi's tenure as Attorney General. She genuinely seemed to believe she wasn't accountable to Congress. That congressional oversight was something she could participate in on her own terms or not at all. That her loyalty to Trump superseded her constitutional obligation to answer to the people's representatives. That telling Raskin, "you don't tell me anything," was acceptable. This wasn't just about one hearing. It was about whether the executive branch considers itself subject to congressional accountability. And Bondi's conduct suggested the answer was no, until Raskin reminded her that she didn't have a choice. Here is why Raskin's approach mattered. He didn't just get frustrated and give up. He stopped, explained the rules, put the explanation on the record, and made clear that compliance wasn't optional. That might seem procedural, but it is fundamental to how oversight works. If witnesses can ignore time limits, congressional oversight becomes impossible. If they can refuse to stop talking when members reclaim time, 5-minute periods become witness monologues. If they can attack questioners instead of answering, accountability disappears. Raskin was defending not just his own time, but the institutional capacity of Congress to hold the executive branch accountable.